Hey guys, it's JDosX here, and it's Monday where I am, so that means it's time for the very first mini Tut Monday. I'd like to kick things off with the ultimate definitive guide for object selection in 3ds Max. Now look, I know what you're thinking, but anything that has over 20 buttons to pick objects needs a tutorial. So let's get started. Our friendly helper today will be Ted the Box. Ted the Box is a cool box. I made him this morning, and he's the finest creation I've ever made, so don't say anything mean about him, because I'll feel bad. Anyway, let's get started. The very first thing I'll introduce you to are these 5 controls up here. The first one is your standard selection object selection tool. That lets you just sort of click to pick objects, like so. This is very standard stuff. If you hold control, you can select more objects by holding control and clicking them. If you want to deselect an object, hold Alt, and you can click the objects you want to deselect. Next, I'll move to the left and I'll go to our selection filter. And to demonstrate what it does, I'll just make a light real quick. So there we go, there's a light that really didn't do anything. But anyway, now what selection filter does is it lets you only select certain types of objects. So right now it's on all, so I can select everything. If I turn it to just geometry, I can select head, but I can't select the light. If you switch it to light, you can select just the light and not head, no matter how hard I try. So that's what that does, and it's got everything else like cameras, helpers, warps and stuff. As you progress through using 3ds Max, each of these they just select different types of objects, and they may be useful depending on what's in your scene. We'll turn that back to all, and we'll get rid of the light. Now we're going to move on to select by name. That's pretty simple. All it does the same thing as regular selecting, but it lets you pick via the name. So if I click Ted, hit OK, it picks his box. If I can also select more than one object. So right now I've got Ted's face and Ted selected, so it'll select them both. Simple as that. If you have things in your scene, like for example lights and stuff, these buttons will turn on and off displayable objects. So for example, his face and his little text on his side is a shape, but his box is a geometry. So let's say I only want to select geometry in the scene. All I have to do is just turn off all these and select Ted the box, and that means like pretty much everything else will disappear from my list except for geometry in our case, and that makes it a lot simpler. So I'll show that again. So yeah, there we go. Simple as that. Yeah, and you can also do things like frozen objects and stuff. I'll go into object freezing later. So that's that for that one. Now next we'll go into selection regions. Now selection regions are really cool. If you've ever used a standard, like, if you on the Windows desktop, you can click and drag a rectangle to select your icons and whatnot. Let's say a rectangular selection region isn't right for you. Click and hold to bring this pull down up, and you can select different region types. So right now I'll pick up the circle. The circle creates a circle originating from your original mouse position, and you can use that to click and drag like that. You've got the polygon type, which lets you create a nifty little polygon, and it'll only select things it chops through. And the reason though that's really cool, like it's not very useful in this scene, but that one and the lasso tool, which I'll show you now, they're really useful if your scene's quite cluttered and you need to just pick a little object. So with the lasso one, this will be very familiar for you Microsoft Paint veterans. And as you can see, I drew a little artistic shape, and it only crossed through Ted's box, so it only selects Ted's box. If I cross it through his text and his box, it'll select both. Very last one is the paint selection region, or the spray can, that effectively lets you sort of spray your paint over objects. So as you can see, there's a little circle around my cursor. If I click and hold and I just wave it over, like paint over the objects I want to select, it'll select those. That's really cool if you want to do some. That's more sort of fine handled stuff. Now we've got window or crossing. There's our last selection item. Our last control on our tool pane, sorry. And what that lets us do is it lets us decide whether we can select objects that intersect our region, or only select objects that are completely inside it. So what do I mean by that? Well, by default it's on crossing. Yes, crossing, I think that's it. I'm not sure which one's the default, but by default it's not blue. So in the default mode, you can see there's a box in the middle of the selection region, and what that does is I'll select Ted's box. Only part of the box is selected, but because the box crossed through our selection region, it picked it. And this means that if I do this, it selects his face and his box, which is pretty obvious. If I turn window crossing on, I go to select part of Ted, and it's like, oh, hang on, nothing's working, what happened? It's because Ted's box isn't completely inside the selection region. Now, if I drag it in, so Ted's box is completely inside the region, it selects Ted's box as well as these other objects because they are also inside. Where does this become useful? If I want to select the face by clicking and dragging, or the face and the text I'll do. So I just click and drag, it selects the face and the text, but not his box. Simple as that. Next we're going to move on to sub-object modes and their selection properties with those. Now I'll show you an edit poly. That's my favorite editing modifier, but if you use edit mesh, that's fine too. It works the same. So we've got 5 different sub-object modes here. I'll go through them all one by one. And actually first I'll show you how to freeze an object. That's a better idea. So what I'll do is if you freeze an object, that stops you from modifying it all. So if I say freeze selection, notice how his box has changed color. Not really, but I'll do this one. See how that went grey? That denotes a frozen object. So now I can't click it, but I can select Ted's text. And to reverse the procedure, you unfreeze, like that. Unfreeze all. You can also go into here and select here, display frozen objects, and display hidden objects, and you can use those to select in there as well. And that'll appear in the list. Just to have an experiment, it's pretty fun. Yeah, selecting objects is fun. What am I saying? Anyway, we'll go into the first one, which is vertex. And just to make it more obvious what I'm doing, I'll turn on edged faces, which makes the text look disgusting. But anyway, the very first thing we'll go through is, yeah, pretty much this shows you all your corners. They're all blue, as you can see. So whenever you select one, it goes red, and you can manipulate the selected ones. So I'll just show you by moving that around. Excellent. Now, ignore backfacing. What does that one do? Well, let's say we're going to give Ted some definition and make some eyebrows, for example. You'd think, well, I want to manipulate these 3 faces, so you select them. Bob's your uncle? Not really, because you selected the ones on the back too, and, you know, I don't think eyebrows on the back of someone looks good. Just saying. So, now you may think, why did that happen? Well, it basically means that any vertex which is inside your selection region will be selected. How do you stop this? You click ignore backfacing. What it means is that only things that are facing you will be selected. So we've clicked it, try again, and you'll notice that only the 3 on the front have been selected. Now, how do you tell if you've made a mistake? Well, what you can do is, there's 3 ways. There's 2 ways you can tell and 1 way you prevent. The 1 way you prevent is ignore backfacing, but sometimes it's really hard to, it's not always a blanket solution. So how do you tell? Well, there's 2 ways. The first way, which I like, is down here, which is a little selection counter. That tells you what you selected and how many of them you selected. So if we don't select anything, it says no vertices. Select 1, it tells you that's vertex 85. That's the 85th vertex in the model. Click and drag, and we've selected 3 vertices. If ignore backfacing was on, this says 6. If that's off, sorry, it now says 6, but it looks like we were only meant to select 3, so that means something's gone wrong. What's the second way you can tell? This gizmo here will always be in the middle of everything you selected. So if you just select these 3, you'd expect the gizmo to be over that vertice. But because it's not, you can tell that something's gone wrong. So consequently, if I turn ignore backfacing on, you'll just be able to see what I mean. There we go. Just those 3 have been selected, and you can see that because it says so here. And the gizmo is exactly where you would have expected it to be. So a little bit of pre-planning does help always. Shrink and grow effectively let you spread your selection region out like a game of virus or invasion, pretty much. So if you're feeling bored, you can do that. So to do that, you click 1 vertex, or you click more than 1 actually, I'll click 2. And you click grow. And you may have to see this in HD, but anyway, as I grow, it selects more and more, and it just spreads out from your already selected vertices. If I shrink, it just does the opposite, and it'll go back to where it started. That's it for that. Now I'm going to go into soft selection. Soft selection works the same across vertex, edge, border, face, and elements. So I'm just going to go through it in vertex. Soft selection effectively lets you manipulate vertices in the... Hang on, what have I done? There we go. Soft selection effectively lets you manipulate surrounding vertices based on how you manipulate the original one. So what you can do is it's hard to explain it quickly, and I don't have much time, so I'll just try to do it as quickly as I can. The very first thing which happens is if you click an object, what it does is it tells you how much it manipulates surrounding vertices based on the color of these lines. So if it's red, it'll do a lot, and if it's blue or white, it will affect it a little bit to not at all. So right now, as you can see, all the faces that are red, all the vertices that are red and yellow get affected the most, and the ones that are blue and the edges that are blue and white show that not much is happening at all. Cool. How do you manipulate that? What you can do is there's two things you can do: edge distance and fall off change how much is selected. And to do that, I'm going to turn on shaded face toggle. Blue denotes an area once again which is not being affected, and red and yellow and green determine areas which are being affected. So what does edge distance do? That effectively chops off the effect after a certain distance, defined here in this number. So you turn this up and it will increase, turn it down and it will decrease, which it didn't, but there you go. So there you go, that works. So that's pretty much it. It does not do what fall off does. What fall off does is determines the area of effect. So as you can see, it determines. I'll turn that off for a second. It just determines how spread out it is. But what edge distance does, it just chops it off, so it's not a smooth transition anymore. So as you can see, with fall off, that's a nice smooth transition. Edged faces, that is not smooth. Now, the way that soft selection works is the way vertices are manipulated will be determined by this graph. So as you can see, the vertices, as I move them, move in the same pattern as the graph. So if you want to change how that works, you use pinch and bubble. So pinch lets you change the shape of the graph. It effectively makes the crest in the middle very, very pointy. If it's positive, or if it's negative, it'll push it out like that. And bubble will determine how raised the sides of the graph are. So if I make a really ridiculous one like this, just for lols. Yeah, I said for lols. And now you can see we've got a crest, then we've got two troughs, and we've got two other crests. You'd expect the same thing to happen, and as you can see, it does. So you can have some fun with that, and it creates really awesome effects. The very last thing I'll go through is this is paint soft selection. What paint soft selection does is it lets you effectively paint the areas which you want to select. So you just click and you paint. If selection value is selection value will determine how weighted the vertex is. So if you turn it on to like half, you notice that vertices that I paint are now yellow, and ones, if I go to like 0.2, you notice that ones I paint are blue. So that just determines how much it affects it. Brush size, that is just how big the area you want to paint is, and brush strength will determine sort of it's sort of like these selection value and strength work in tandem. Selection value tells you what weighting you want to give each vertex, and what select brush strength does is says how close you want that to be. So how close you want to get to selection values. If it's 1, it will definitely go to 0.2. If it's 0.5, if it's half, it'll get close-ish, and it'll get close but not to 0.2, and the amount it does will determine on what weighting the vertex is originally, and it's hard to explain, but the best way to do it is just to give it a go. Blurring works in a similar way to what it does in Photoshop. All it does is blurs your selection region. It just blurs the weightings, and it works to 1 yet. It is not showing it for. Oh, there we go. So you may not have seen that. Revert. There we go. Make some red stuff. Awesome. So now I'm going to blur it, and as you can see, it's blurring a little bit. It's hard to show on a video, so it's the best thing to do is just to go play with it. And if you go into brush options, this lets you do a whole heap of cool things. I won't go into detail on that, you don't need it, but that's the same as in paint deformation brush options, so feel free to have a play with that in your own time. So that's that for soft selection. We're going to move now on to, real quick, the other 4. Did I cover everything here? Yes, I did. So edge. Edge works in exactly the same way as before, except you select edges, which make up your model. And except we've got 2 new tools. We've got ring and we have loop. And also we also have by vertex. What by vertex does is it lets you pick edges which spread out from a vertex. So if I click this vertex here, it picks the edges which come off that. Simple as that. Ring and loop effectively create two different types of loops around your object. So I've selected these two lines here. If I click loop, it creates a loop around like that. And if I click ring, it creates a ring around it like that. So it just depends on what you want to do with your object. It's pretty useful. Next we'll move on to border. Now you'd think border looks similar to edge, and it is, but if you look, I can't select anything. Well, why is this? It's because borders, I'm just going to delete a bit of Ted's head here, forgive me Ted. Borders will only select edges which open out on free space. As you can see, I can now pick these because there's no face there. And that's really cool if you want to do something like this. You can that's really cool if you want to create a shape by extruding off an open area. So to do that, you hold shift and then you drag like that. Like that, and that's cool. Now he's got a chimney. I think I like that. I'm gonna leave it. Ted's got a chimney now. Alright, so that's that for it. And also I'll just mention real quick that shrink and grow don't select surrounding borders, they select surrounding edges. So that's all you have to watch out for. Last but not least, we have the face selection. That's pretty simple, it just selects your faces, but we've got one new tool here, and we've also got one tool that's been around before, but I'll now demonstrate it. So the very first thing that we'll come to is by angle. What is by angle, you ask? Well, I'll just quickly have to go into the topic of normals. Each face has got a normal, which is effectively a little arrow that points that is perpendicular to the plane of the face. So what do I mean by that? Well, these faces are all flat, so the normal points up. It effectively means what direction is it facing, pretty much. So yeah, all these on the top here, they're facing up. This face here, it'd be facing out. This face here would be facing out, and then this front here, the normals would also be facing out. So what by angle does is it says if these normals are within a certain angle of each other, I will select that face also. So if I select by angle and I put it at 45 degrees, it means that faces that are within 45 degrees of each other will be selected. So notice that I clicked one here, and it selected the whole top of Ted's face, Ted's head, but it didn't select the rest of him. If I change it to 91, however, because as you will know, faces of a cube are 90 degrees from each other, it selects all of them, and that's essentially how it works. Now, the last thing which I'll go through in faces is preview selection. Now, preview selection is really cool if you want to have some fine-tuned selection of individual faces, but don't want to use the paint can, which is understandable. So, like paint can, it does the same thing as before. You can select individual faces, but it's not very precise. So, what we can do with the paint can tool is up here, by the way, just if you hadn't remembered. What preview selection does is it lets you effectively see what you will select before you select it. So right now it's off, but if I hit sub object, it tells you which polygons are highlighted and how many are selected. So if as I wave my mouse around, I haven't clicked anything, and I have no keys are held, by the way, it produces a box. It highlights a face I can select. Hold down Control, and I can now highlight multiple faces. Click, and it selects them all. If I hold Control Alt, I can paint over selected faces, and then I can click to deselect them, and that's it. Multi is similar, however, it lets you also select individual, it lets you select edges and vertices as well. So if I click this edge, for example, it selects the edge, and it makes the faces I've selected a darker grey. And the reason it does that is because it's showing that whilst I've selected these faces, I'm now in edge mode. So whatever you click last will be whatever mode you go into. So if I click the face here, it takes me back into polygon. Click an edge, takes me into edge. Click a vertex, takes me into vertex. And that's it. We're going to go back to edge now. And the very last thing I'm going to show you is select by element. Now, this requires an explanation of the difference between a mesh and a model. A model is what you're all familiar with hearing, and a model is made up of several meshes. A model in 3ds Max is, you can see what a model is by seeing what is inside this box. So what I mean by this box is this white one here, which has got the little lines coming off its corners. Now, Ted's model has only one mesh in it, which is his body. So when I click anywhere on Ted, it selects all the faces that make him up. Why is this important? Well, let's say that I make Ted a friend, and I'm calling Tim. Tim also has a chimney on his head, because he's cool. I'm going to give Tim a face. To tell them apart, I'm going to shrink them. Now let's say that that they're such good friends that Ted and Tim move into the same model together. So I'm going to attach Tim to Ted, and there you go. Now, as you can see, we've got two separate meshes, but we've got one model which encompasses them both. So now this is useful, because if I go here and click this one, it'll only select Ted, and if I click here, it'll only select Tim. To demonstrate this further, let's say Tim and Ted got into a really grotesque fight, and Tim ended up like this, somehow. You may think, oh, how am I going to separate them? It's easy. All you do is select the, oops, wrong one. Go back to their models of their bodies, and you just turn on select by element, and you click either Tim or Ted, and you separate them. Simple as that. And that's really useful if you're creating complex models which have multiple meshes in them. But you just got to be careful that you don't fuse them together. So let's say that Tim and Ted got into an even worse fight, and the fight was so bad that they became fused to each other. Don't even ask how, but I'm just going to fuse them, because I'm a cruel person. So once again, shift to drag, and then you can use target welds. I'll go into all this in detail later. The main purpose of this tutorial is selection, the funnest topic of them all. Totally. So you'll now notice that the two meshes, well, they originally were two meshes, but they're attached, so now they're actually one mesh. So if I go back to select by element, click Tim, Ted selected. Click Tim, Ted, Tim is selected. So that's just something you got to watch out for if you're making a complex model and think you may have to manipulate individual meshes later on. But that's actually it. So thank you guys all for watching this, and I hope you've learned a little bit more about selection in 3ds Max. I'm just going to say the holding hands. That's less creepy. Anyway, if you have a particular thing you're stuck on, leave it in the comments, and I'll put it in my list of things to mini Tut on Monday. Yeah, if you liked it, thumbs up. Thumbs up is cool. It makes me happy. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed, and enjoy the rest of your day.